particular tragedy called for a total realignment of the Apollo spacecraft, which was done, and about 2.5 years later, men were flying to the moon in the new changed spacecraft. Today, by comparison, this thing came on unexpectedly. The telemetry, I am told, coming back from the spacecraft was fine. Everything seemed to be working perfectly, and then suddenly, without warning, not even warning to the computers on board, which would have aborted the mission and perhaps even given the astronauts a fighting chance for their lives, no warning at all, suddenly there was an explosion. That's the big difference between that unexpected occurrence, which was, of course, a terrible tragedy in its time, but called for a recreation of the program, and the one today, which probably will call for a recreation of the program, but for different reasons.
And Jay BARBREE in Cape Canaveral tonight. Are you hearing anything at all from the NASA officials who are down there and the workers that you know so well, or are they absolutely mum on the situation?
Well, what we know tonight, Tom, is that already Jess Moore, who is the Associate Administrator of Manned Spaceflight for NASA, is heading an interim board. They're studying the data. What they have done, they have impounded everything, all the notes, anything that took place in the preparation of this mission. And they will appoint a board later after they have everything under control. And, of course, no shuttle will fly until the reason for this tragedy is known. And tomorrow we do expect that we will have another news conference in the afternoon and perhaps learn a little bit more about what is taking place and what is known at this early date.
Jay, were you in your customary post back there tucked alongside the NBC booth watching the space shuttle with your very good eyesight and describing it on radio at the time that it happened?
Yes, we weren't on live because, as people have pointed out, Tom, we've gotten a little blasé about this, but I was watching it. And there for a moment, as it climbed up into this dark blue sky, I had suddenly had the feeling that something was going to happen. And I was watching real close, and it did. And I knew when it happened what had happened. I saw the boosters, as everyone did, spiraling away, spinning madly. And I stood there watching for Challenger to reappear. I kept looking for Challenger and the crew, and Tom, it never came back. It was all in that fire.
This kind of moment has been at the back of the minds of all of us who have covered the space program since its inception. But we really never expected it to happen, did we, Jay?
No, we sure didn't. We expected it back in the days of Mercury and possibly Gemini. We expected it when John Glenn, they thought in Mercury Control that his heat shield had come off. We also had a near tragedy when Liberty Bell 7 was lost, and Gus Grissom had to swim for his life just 100 miles downrange from here. And then, of course, there was the Apollo 13, where the nation held its breath for 4 days. But we had gotten to the point with 24 successful shuttle missions that we thought the computers, I suppose, Tom, would take care of everything. Well, today they didn't.
And Roy Neal, the scientist, and your contacts in NASA that you have talked to today, are they shocked? Are they being realistic about the possibility that this could have happened and it was going to happen sooner or later anyway? How are they feeling?
Well, first, Tom, they are shocked. They are mystified. And to them, this was something in many cases, particularly on the engineering rather than the science level, this was something that was indeed expected. They kept waiting for the axe to fall. And indeed, we at NBC, for example, in every case, at every liftoff and at every landing, have had the equipment standing by just in case. Always lurking in the back of our minds has been the thought that this is not the safe business. And of course, we have the parallel of commercial aviation, or if you will, the President of the United States. We even cover his aircraft when it takes off and when it lands.
Thank you very much, Roy Neal. In Pasadena tonight, Jay BARBREE at Cape Canaveral. For almost 20 years now, the space program has moved along without a loss of life, although by no means without problems. Tonight, NBC's Robert Hager looks into NASA's troubles and its prospects now for the future.
The shuttle program had already been troubled by mechanical failures, cameras that wouldn't work, satellites which were supposed to spin into orbit but didn't, and delays which had threatened to cut back the 15 missions that had been planned for this year. Another big NASA project to put a permanent space station in orbit, a place astronauts could shuttle to and from. That plan had run into problems and had been pushed back, perhaps to the late 1990s. A planned unmanned mission to get a closer look at Halley's Comet was scrapped completely. Not enough money. There have been other criticisms. For instance, that the military was moving in on NASA, taking over more and more of the civilian space program, changing NASA's traditional role. Even at the top of the agency, there's been trouble. Administrator James Beggs forced last month to take a leave of absence, indicted on a charge of defrauding the government when he was an executive at General Dynamics some years ago. NASA's current acting administrator, William Graham, brand new on the job in the midst of this crisis. But NASA has survived previous problems, from the earliest days of the unmanned rocket tests through the drastic fire 19 years ago yesterday aboard Apollo 1 on the launch pad at then Cape Kennedy, taking the lives of Gus Grissom, Edward White, and Robert Chaffee. So today there were promises to keep going. Test pilot Chuck Yeager.
When you have an accident like this, it doesn't mean the end of everything. I mean, you got to fall back and take a look at it. But the main thing is that you've got to analyze the data and find out what caused the accident, then take your corrective action.
At the Cape, Vice President Bush.
We must never, as people in our daily lives or as a nation, stop exploring, stop hoping, stop discovering. We must press on.
Obviously, NASA will carry on. But tonight, many here are saying that each time the agency needs to ask for more money, people, or equipment, they may be harder to come by now. Robert Hager, NBC News, Washington.
The nation's space program is, of course, tremendously expensive. It is supported by the taxpayers, and it exists only at the discretion of Congress. But NBC's John Dancy has found considerable support in Congress, even in these difficult times, for the continuation of the program, despite the enormity of today's tragedy.
Tom, Congress has shown tremendous support for the space program. It has a budget of about $7.5 billion, even at a time when other programs are being cut. But today, Congress was stunned.
We ought to take a deep breath and step back before we go ahead with any further manned flights.
It's my opinion that we should lessen the emphasis on civilian involvement now because of the danger.
And NASA now has to find $1 billion plus, close to $2 billion now in its budget to replace this loss. And given the restrictions of Graham-Rudman, they are going to have some problems in realigning their schedule and their priorities.
Challenger was one of 4 U.S. space shuttles, a hugely expensive machine used for both civilian and military missions.
If there was a substantial delay in the shuttle program, it would have, I think, a rather serious impact on our modernization of our satellite capabilities.
Senator Ted Stevens of Alaska heads the subcommittee that appropriates money to pay for military missions aboard the shuttle.
1/4 of the civilian space program, one of the 4 shuttles, blew up today. Is it going to be replaced?
Yes. We will find a way to replace that because I think it's essential, and we're sort of self-insurers in that regard. But it is my judgment that the American public will want that program to go ahead, and will want to really carry out the program, try to attain the goals that those people on board, the 7 crew members, have sacrificed their lives for now. I think that's going to become even more important to us now.
So, Tom, while there is a mood here to find out what happened and make sure that it doesn't happen again, I found absolutely nobody here who wanted to cut or cancel the space program. Tom?
But we're really dealing in a time of almost fiscal austerity in this country, and especially in the federal government. The Challenger today cost $1.2 billion to build. It probably will cost more than that to replace. Because the program will be offline, it means that we don't have any income coming into NASA as a result of the space shuttle program. Has anyone really figured out the economic consequences of what happened here today?
Well, the consequences are going to be very severe, Tom, because I don't think we're looking at a delay of a month or 2 months. We're looking at a long delay here until NASA figures out exactly what went wrong and fixes whatever it was that went wrong. But it is essential that the country continue with the space program, because remember, this is not only a civilian program, it is a military program as well. And a lot of the eggs in the military basket are riding on the space shuttle program. Now, of course, the military can use what are called expendable rockets, one-time use rockets, and get up many of its satellites that way. But they also depend on the space shuttle.
I'm not denying that, but what I am suggesting, or John Dancy, we call him Bud, his name is John Dancy. I'm not denying that, John, but what I am saying is that this just puts more pressure on the deficit, which is already considerable in terms of pressure.
There is no question that it does put considerable pressure on Congress, but there is also, I think, a sort of philosophical question here, an image question. Will the United States pull back at this point? I don't think they will. I think, as Ted Stevens said, they'll find the money and go ahead somehow.
All right, thanks. John Dancy at the Capitol.